That's it for January 31, 2026. We're in the fourth year, and this is day 342 since the start of the full-scale invasion. Before we start today's report, I want to speak openly with you about something important. Now, I'll speak to you informally instead of my usual formal way. This will be the last situation report to be published on a Saturday, unless, of course, something truly extraordinary happens in the Ukraine war that requires immediate analysis. A situation report takes about 10 minutes for you as viewers. For me, however, it means almost 4 hours of work from research and analysis to editing and uploading. And that's every single day, whether it's during the week, on weekends, or on holidays. In the past, the channel had around 100 new subscribers a day. Today, it's 2 or 3. And to be completely honest, that's extremely demotivating. It's not because there aren't any potential new viewers anymore, because since 01.01, the channel has been suffering massively from the YouTube algorithm. The videos are hardly being played or recommended anymore, even though nothing has changed in the content, quality, or the way I work. Even YouTube can't explain why, and I actually asked them. Last year, I also ended a relationship that lasted almost 6 years, not just because of the channel. There were many reasons, but one of them was that I divided my time between volunteering, work, studying, and especially the situation reports in such a way that there was hardly any room left for my partner. And now I realize myself that I hardly have any time left. But that was okay for me because this constant channel growth was, of course, very motivating to keep going. Clicks have stayed stable over time, but the war in Ukraine is clearly different now than it was 3 years ago. The front is moving very little, major turning points are absent, even though there are big challenges again for 2026. Of course, that doesn't make the war any less cruel, but it takes away some of the momentum that captivated many of you, and especially new viewers at the beginning. Of course, I will continue to report, but from now on, I will use Saturdays to focus on other projects and topics, even beyond the Ukraine war. Videos about World War II, the Bundeswehr, or general military or tactical topics have reached a much wider audience in recent months. And even more, the short format is slowly developing better. For now, I'm only cutting out Saturday. If the reach and subscriber growth don't improve, I might cut out another day as well. Simply so, I have more time for new content. The channel is called War and Tactic, not Daily Ukraine War Report, even though that's its main focus. It was established before the invasion and was never solely focused on the war, as shown by the logo. Finally, I want to say one more thing. Thank you to all the subscribers so far, to the channel members, and especially to the 6 lieutenant colonels who all make the channel financially possible. And above all, to the Algo crew who kept feeding the algorithm even in tough times and made sure that almost every video had an incredible rate of over 99%. I have, and that's a fact, the best community in the world. And for the best community in the world, after a long time, I finally had the promised War on Tactic medals made for especially outstanding members. And I already have a few names in mind who are, of course, eligible for this honor. But that's something for spring 2026, so stay tuned. No matter how great a community may be, it eventually has to keep growing. That's why the Saturday status report is discontinued until further notice, so I can use that time for other videos. And with that, I warmly welcome you. I'm greeting you for the last time on a regular Saturday. Welcome to the status report. In today's report, we see punishments within the Russian army. We also see interesting reports from Ukrainian drone units in the Pokrovsk area about losses. And what we also see are interesting talks about peace negotiations taking place directly between Ukraine and Russia, as well as much more. The Russians are once again punishing their own soldiers for theft, attempted desertion, and drug abuse. Recently, the punishments are very often carried out at trees, as you can see. We now often see them tied naked to trees, forced to freeze in icy temperatures. Or like this one here, you are tied up like an animal and simply beaten. Above all, you can see a drastic development here. About a year ago, They were still locked up in kennels or thrown into pits and starved a bit. But the winter and the snow made new methods possible. Russians have always been creative. By the way, if you want to know what kind of, let's call it, adult toy he's using to hit his comrade, just watch the full video on Telegram. Of course, as always, it's very questionable why someone would even have something like that out in the field. Feel free to leave your guess in the comments. Someone who treats his comrades that way likely treats civilians no better. In Kiev, the metro has stopped completely because Russian attacks caused low voltage in the power grid. Multiple stations lost power, escalators stopped, and the Kharkiv metro had to halt operations. That means we see that the Russians have now damaged the Ukrainian energy infrastructure so severely that the Ukrainians can no longer fully operate transportation, even without attacks. By the way, this is the first time since the beginning of the war that subway service in these cities has been completely shut down due to a lack of electricity. Now, conditions on the Ukrainian railways are similar to ours, only under rocket fire and power shortages. The Ukrainian elite unit Alpha reports that they were able to eliminate 1,800 Russian soldiers near Pokrovsk within a week. If we look at other Ukrainian casualty reports, we can assume that the losses along the entire front are about 8,500 soldiers within a week. Accordingly, this unit alone would have accounted for 20% of the total weekly losses. That's a lot, but we also have to weigh things a bit. Let's take a look at the pro side. Drone units in particular need to verify their kill count for bonus programs. That means the numbers can be very accurate, because otherwise they won't get any bonus funds. For everyone who doesn't know what this is about, drone units get a certain number of points credited to their account for specific kills, which they can then exchange for new equipment or special gear. And they have to be visually confirmed, so they actually have to be verified. You can't get 400 points while also publicly claiming to have eliminated 1,800 soldiers. On the other hand, we also know that only a very small part of the Ukrainian units are responsible for the biggest losses on the Russian side. In larger attacks or defenses, we usually see the same brigades on the Ukrainian side over and over again, and they are therefore supplied better and more than a territorial defense brigade that's been at the Belarus border for months and only knows the war by hearsay or brief rotations. At the same time, Pokrovsk is still the largest main job site at the front. That means it also makes sense that the major losses come together here. But 20% for one drone unit seems pretty high to me. That makes me wonder how much of the remaining 80% came from other units in Pokrovsk, and how many fell on the rest of the front. Because the pilots from Alpha wouldn't have been responsible for every casualty in Pokrovsk themselves. Ukraine and Russia are currently holding direct talks, and Peskov, Kremlin spokesman, made an interesting statement for the first time. Instead of blocking everything as usual, or blaming the other side, the Kremlin spokesman said he might actually find a ceasefire for the energy sector acceptable. Now talks are to take place again between the two states to discuss ideas and push forward a ceasefire. Russia's energy sector losses have recently become too costly. We've seen this before on the Ukrainian side. Most of the energy sector is gone, as the Russians destroyed many power plants. So it's in both sides' interest to maintain a ceasefire there. The well-known Russian military blogger Zeplogger Fighter Bomber, whom I've quoted frequently in recent days, and who is also considered an unofficial but well-connected channel of the Russian Air Force, is reacting very angrily to the Kremlin spokesperson's recent statements about a possible energy ceasefire. He often calls these statements betrayal and weakness. He writes in essence that Russia has shown that we can be bent. Fighter Bomber pointedly asks what Russia truly gains from this, especially considering the cost in Russian soldiers' lives. Would these supposedly low-cost diplomatic background costs be? The reaction is remarkable because it shows how great the dissatisfaction is, even among Kremlin-affiliated and ultra-patriotic circles. On the other hand, I also wonder how patriotic it really is if you reflexively dismiss every diplomatic option. Near Dnepropetria, we have another Russian attack, first up here in the yellow area. Here, we also looked at the last failed major attack at a red pin. That was here, and they're still attacking. So even though the attack failed, the Russians didn't stop. Meanwhile, there's a salient here that the Russians firmly control. They controlled it and remain active there, now expanding their lead even more. And as we know the Russians, once they've managed to advance somewhere, they'll try to attack in all directions up front here. That means we will probably see attacks to the north in the coming days, attacks towards Dnepropetria, attacks to the west, as well as to the south and southeast. They then try to spread out as much as possible and see if there is any weak spot along the Ukrainian defenses here that they can exploit. And when they have found it, they focus on that point again and then start the same game all over again. Usually they capture it and quickly spread out again. Thank you to all subscribers, Ceramic Clinic staff, and the Algo crew. A special thanks goes to Lieutenant Colonel Reneke, Robert Ziller, Dintrick, Freddie, and Meyerhofer. They all make this channel possible in the first place. Thank you one last time in this regular Saturday report. Until then, please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next report.